Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. We are really thrilled today because the great master Daniel Sprick has released a brand new video called Painting Light and Value. You're going to love this.
In this video, I am going to attempt to paint sunlight and shadows in a constantly changing situation, as it always does, over several hours. I'm interested in light and shadow because they lend themselves to dramatic compositions. It's an idea that goes back to Claude Lorraine, it goes back to 17th century, 16th century Italian and northern landscape painting. It's been around a long time, still popular because it's still good. And I certainly haven't gotten tired of it. Essentially, it's the idea of using an isolated light amid various shadows. And it has a drama and a beauty. Quite honestly, the idea is very simple, but to execute it in a way that's beautiful is really quite challenging. No matter how formulaic it might seem, it's not as easy as it sounds to make it a really beautiful work out of that. So let's get started and see what happens. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to my garage at the studio. And it's nice to have 3 different places to paint. Sometimes I actually paint in the studio. Today I'm going to paint this view looking from the garage to the driveway with the open gate, and it kind of has 2 significant areas, 2 levels. And I'm going to paint the distance first, which I usually do. There's a shadow this morning that I really want to paint. It's gone now. Let's see if I can kind of make it up anyway. Well, some of it is remaining. I think that really helps make an interesting and dynamic composition like Dutch painting of the 17th century. So I'm going to get started. So starting out today with titanium white. This is what I think they call it lime green, something, cadmium green light. And it's just a pre-mixed green that's really nice, actually. Cad yellow pale, raw sienna, burnt sienna. There's some kind of purple, I don't even know what it is. Ultramarine, turquoise blue, sap green, umber black. And if anything's lacking, well, I've got it all available. I think that's going to cover the basis for now. So I just started sketching a little bit. Just drew in the shadows a little bit that I'm interested in this diagonal, which I think will have a nice visual quality. This cast shadow from the garage roof line, like that. This part of the fence, I'm going to keep that in shadow. Have a cast shadow over here, so I'm already getting a feel of diagonal, so I think I'll emphasize that. I didn't even see that before, but I think it's going to be just right. I'm going to get this, there's a black shadow here cast by the open gate. I'm going to use that. It's disappearing on us now, but it's not too hard to remember what it looked like. And here's a roof line of our carport. To decide where that goes. And then there's a really bright light out here of a distant house. it's a light blue house, but knowing me, I'm probably going to turn that into white or yellow, something that'll really glow. Move it out a little bit. I didn't know I had a house moving business. A tree and a pretty ragged garden. I like the distant houses. I think those are going to be a really nice part of this. So that's the basic idea. And I'll just, I use the charcoal because it's so tentative and you can wipe it right off. But this time I think I'm okay with the way it's drawn, so I'll just reinforce these with pencil. And you'll see why in a second. Well, okay, I know the suspense is killing you, so here's why. I'm doing it because we'll do a wash over it, and the charcoal would just simply disappear, but the pencil lines won't wash away that easy. See what remains. That's enough to work with. You want to get a pretty good idea now where the brightest light is going to be, or the dominant light, even if it's not the brightest. The brightest would be these distant houses. But right now, I'm thinking, what am I thinking? Yeah, those are going to be the brightest, and these will be larger, but not as bright. But they will integrate as one big shape of the composition. At least that's the intention. This scene really appeals to me because of the open fence. In a way, it's like an open window, and it's a view from one world to the next. And this world we're in is in shadow, and there's a distant world drenched in sunlight. So those would be psychological and emotional factors, narrative factors, but it attracts me most of all for the isolated shafts of light, which vanish very quickly, which they always do. The approach that I've used here is to map out the big shapes of light and shadow early on, knowing that they're going to vanish, they're going to be gone. But you've got basically a value study already. Wow, it's beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful to me. I love the scene. Sometimes beauty is not in the most obvious places. The purpose of the yellow is really to provide an overall atmosphere of warmth, and I want to key my colors that will be subsequent to this, key it to the yellow, warm color. There's nothing that glows warm like yellow. So this selective toning, I'm working at this point with very thinned out washes, which are essentially like watercolor. And it's a watercolor technique of working initially from the lightest to the darkest. I call it selective toning. In a way, that's what watercolor is, because you're just toning patches with transparent paint, which is what a wash is. Selective toning as opposed to toning the entire thing, say with the gray or beige, and doing it selectively because that will make subsequent colors easier to cover. start with the lightest and then do a little darker for the sky and for the shadow areas. And that will set up, because I've used a type of gesso that's fairly absorbent. And it's a warm day working, so it'll set up quickly, and it's actually quite convenient for the approach that I want to use. Using just a little bit of raw umber with yellow and real thin wash. Maybe just a little bit of earth red. But this still has to be pretty much in our light family. Boy, I'm such a Bob Ross. Okay. Yeah. I'm changing the colors here because there's a shift to the next temperature and value, particularly value. Mixing colors that are going to be related to the final color. And if I can, in this process, I'll get the colors matched as closely to the final as I'm able. Then that area can already be done. And that's a good thing, because we need to speed things up when we're working on location, because everything changes so fast. And if I can get parts of it done very quickly, well, that just allows more time to accomplish more difficult areas later on in the sequence. I've gone to the third color mixture, and it's a darker area for that middle ground foliage. This part is I compare it to watercolor because it's working from the lightest to the darkest values. And then I'll shift that to working from most distant to the closest. Yeah, I don't think that's worth doing. It's really impaired. At this point, I've gone to the third or fourth darker color, and it's a sky color, and I'm making it pretty dark here so that essentially the white of the yellowish white of those what will become buildings, houses, to make it brighter and more dramatic. As cliche as this sounds, you can't express light without there being significant shadows. And shadows or dark areas. The sky's not shadow, but it's darker, a darker value. And also, one thing I wanted to point out was during this stage of transparent washes, it doesn't have to be exactly right when it goes on, because they can scrub it with a fan blender and make it adjust the value that way, which you can't do so easily with opaque paint, but you can certainly do it with transparent paint. Essentially what you're doing is controlling the quantity of pigment that goes on, which is similar to the way watercolor works. It's values are controlled by diluting. With watercolor, it's water, and with oil paint, it's mineral spirit, solvent or turpentine or whatever you're using. And I'm aware that that's an exaggeration of darkening the sky, but I think that will be effective in the long run, so that's why I'm doing it. And when you're in the course of a piece, a painting, you're anticipating what will come next and what will be, you know, what's going to work. And there's a certain amount of trial and error, because you may try something and find it isn't going to work the way you had hoped it would, so you have to try something else. Get back here. No. Too bad. So this new color with the purple is going to be a shadow value for the areas of what will be a fence and shadows under trees and shrubs, and the entire foreground will be in shadow cast by the building that we're standing in. And that shadow is long gone by the time I started this painting, but I've been watching it during the morning and just remembering it as I'm blocking it in. This color contains some earth color, raw umber with some dioxazine purple in it for a shadow color. The gravel is an earthy reddish color, and the sky is blue, so you get an optical mixing of blue and red, and it turns out purple. So there's this little diagonal. You don't see it in reality now, but it was happening before, and I think that would be a good addition. I want this, for some reason, I want this S curve here. I'm not sure why, but I do. Fan brush is really handy because what it accomplishes is an even distribution. So you have your paint or your wash drying at the same speed with no thick areas. And it's a way of really controlling the drying and getting a consistent base for what's coming next. The fact that it's warm is helping this wash set up pretty quickly. And in this case, that helps me out. I like that. Not using any medium, just paint thinner in this case. That's all there is. It's just solvent and paint. No medium in this painting. I will use medium in other paintings, particularly when quick drying is needed. But it's hot out, and that panel is fairly absorbent, so there's no advantage to a quicker drying medium. The fan blender is essentially part of my arm. It goes on between strokes so it can have a solid basis for the subsequent stroke. But that's not to mean that every stroke is going to be fanned out, but much of it during the early stages will be, or a big flat smooth area to contrast with a variegated area. Not thinking too much. I can either mix colors and put them on, or I can think, but I can't do both at the same time. Actually, that's a quote from Vincent van Gogh from a really interesting, I don't think it's fictional, I think it's from his diaries. The movie was called Eternity's Gate. It's a beautiful film, actually, about Vincent van Gogh. The filmmaker himself is a noted artist, Julian Schnabel. Where were we? So where did I rub this area out? I wiped that out because it occurred to me after I'd put that dark wash in that I'm going to want it light there. Some sunlight hitting that area. It's the idea now. And, here's something that was happening earlier this morning. It's gone now, but something I find one of the most attractive parts of this view to me is this really deep, dark cast shadow from the open gate. I'm going to go ahead and get that in. just a little friendly little shadow, dark shadow. It's dark, but it's friendly, you see. So this, going in with these dark accents, and now for the first time you're seeing a full range of values. And I like for my pictures to have a full range of values. And so we've got what is essentially the lightest light, the distant houses, that yellowish white, and this shadow area, this really dark black shadows, which I love. They really only happen when the sun's directly behind your back. Because the smaller the shadow in the sun, smaller because of your angle of view, really, and the sun's position, the smaller shadows are really dark. And the big shadows contain quite a bit more light that comes into it from ambient light from the sky. But these are dark little shadows which I cultivate. By the way, I substitute the word canvas because it's just such a common term. It is actually canvas glued onto a wooden panel. But I've covered it with quite a lot of oil primer. And I'll put it on with a drywall tool to smooth it out. Canvas gets just a little too mechanical for me, that consistent weave. So it's still there, but in a reduced form. Some paint left over from a portrait recently, and just the right color for, looks like it could be the right color for a fence. It's just raw umber white, probably some cadmium yellow pale in there. Also known as mud. Mud is a slang term that painters use, usually applying to paint left over from the previous day that's still on your palette and it's still good, and you've just mixed up a whole pile of colors into a nondescript mud. And I think a lot of painters call it mud, but it's really just a kind of a neutral combination of all sorts of colors that had been on your palette the day before. That can be useful, but you don't want to use them unless they're really right for that spot. Or you may grab a pile of it and mix it up as part of a subsequent mixture. Is this mud in the shadow? It looks like mud, but it's a deliberate mixture of raw umber and dioxazine purple. You got to be careful with that dioxazine, though, because it's got a high tinting strength, and it'll invade all your other colors, like in a way, like not to the extreme that phthalo will, but it's got a high tinting strength, so you got to be careful how you control it. Not all the paints have the same tinting strength. It's what artists find out quickly with their first set of oil paints. And some colors have a high tinting strength and that's hard to control, such as, in fact, like phthalos, for example, and to a lesser degree, the dioxazine purple that I'm talking about. But for artists starting out, I would recommend colors of low tinting strength. Like, you got to have titanium white, cad yellow pale, which is pretty strong. Earth colors, a range of earth colors, ultramarine blue, and then a kind of a lighter, and the one that I prefer, in fact, the brush is going to right there on the palette right now, is called turquoise blue, because I guess it's kind of a greenish, lighter blue. It looks like turquoise. There's no turquoise in it. It's some kind of probably a synthetic, which works really well. So, and then, a range of earth colors. Plus, I do recommend sap green. from various manufacturers. But artists who've tried a bunch of manufacturers know that you know, one raw sienna is not the same as another manufacturer's raw sienna. And it's more true of colors like sap green. I'd say ultramarine blue is pretty consistent from one manufacturer to the next. And of course, white should be should be white, and black should be black. Wouldn't be much variation in that. Although I will say that black, which is a color I recommend and do use, ivory black is much more controllable than Mars black in terms of tanning strength. So I would say use the weaker tanning strength with that, and that would be ivory black. The shadow on the fence color is, it's now switched from transparent to opaque color. And that is a mixture of white, raw umber, and dioxazine, probably. You know, when asked what's in those colors, it's really hard for me to remember because I just do it kind of with my hands, not with my brain. I really don't remember what's in all of them. And with neutral colors like that, there are many ways to get there. There's only one way to get to a pure saturated color like a yellow. That's yellow out of the tube. It's the only way you can get there. Any primary color, red, yellow, and blue, you can't make them. And you can't make white either. It just comes out of the tube the way it is. But everything else, really secondary colors, at least in theory, are mixable with the primary colors. However, what we still buy secondary colors like orange, yellow, and green because they use pigments that will make a richer version of those colors than say cadmium red light with ultramarine blue. You can make purple that way, but it's a much more neutral purple, kind of grayish. New colors, oftentimes, if you want it to be clean, you've got to, scrape off the old, messed up colors and put out new color, or somehow find a way in your techniques of scooping it with a palette knife to keep dirty colors apart from clean colors. However you can do it, and usually, if I'm putting out new colors, it's because I don't have enough on there to do what I'm going to need. I'm really kind of parsimonious with colors compared to a lot of artists. I only want to put out how much I'm going to need because I just don't like to waste it. And even so, despite all my efforts to avoid waste, I still end up wasting a lot more than I would like to. A certain amount of it, I just haven't gotten to a point where I can avoid it. So I'm making this blue sky darker than it would seem, or darker than it is, so that you can get a really dramatic light on this areas I'm interested in. As much as I like to paint from back to front, it's not always possible. And so I'll end up going back and forth in terms of the distance. But just the sky at this point, the opaque version of the sky is it's just a little bit lighter than what those tree areas are going to be. And so I am painting around where I anticipate trees are going to be placed. Right now they're a little too evenly spaced for what I like. Those intervals are more consistent than what I want, but as time goes on throughout the course of the painting, I'll be able to adjust that, or I may find it yes, they're too evenly spaced, but the value contrast is so minimal that it doesn't really matter a whole lot. Okay, the dark parts of the trees are the interior parts of the trees. I'm just starting to block some of those in here, going substantially darker than what I had done in the wash areas. If you can imagine the interior of a tree as interior as opposed to the surface. A tree, it's not like a consistent shape like a basketball, but it has a few things in common. So it has, it has a surface with lots of gaps. So it's similar to a spherical object, but it is also different, but nonetheless, well, it's different in the sense that you can see the insides of it through the gaps. And so those are the dark areas, and I'll put the light areas over them. It's the nice thing about oil paint is it covers. I'm applying some paint in the shapes of the trees around the buildings, anticipating what will come next. At this point, I've thought that the building was going to be dark on the right, but I've, leaving the option open to maybe I'll make it quite light. Time will tell as the piece goes on, and I'll just, be deciding what is most advantageous for this particular composition. And so painting around the general shape of that house, seeing what will come next. Painting is kind of a suspenseful process for the artist. And actually that's what makes it interesting, because you don't really know exactly what's coming next. And I'll go on a little diatribe here right now. It bugs me that artists will use a projector to trace, an image, because they've forfeited their ability to transform the image into something that transcends the world we perceive, that makes it more interesting than reality. Okay, it's more interesting for the artist if he or she doesn't know exactly which way it's going to go next. And if it's more interesting for the artist, my guess is it's going to be more interesting for the viewer too, because you have a sense of adventure and excitement, and suspense, and also suspense of not knowing if this effort you're exerting is going to pay off or not. It could be a total dud. There's certainly a failure rate. A lot of paintings we do we're disappointed with, and that's just part of it. That's going to be the case for anyone who really tries their best. You're going to have some pieces you like better than others. And I think that was true for Leonardo da Vinci, and true for any artist who is honest with themselves. Not all of it's good. So we just have that going on. The purpose of developing your skills and getting them, a lot of the things you do with paint, practice it so much that it becomes what we call second nature, so that you're able to be spontaneous and let your idea evolve as it goes on, instead of having it all planned out before you even start. Really, there's only one reason for having a flexible approach, and that's because during the process of it, you may find an idea that you like better than the one you started out with. And that's reason enough. and it invariably happens in my own experience, that the original idea was okay, but because I'm slow, a slow thinker, it takes me time to see things. You know, if I was some sort of genius, I'd see it all at once, but I'm not that, and I don't. It comes to me slowly. But I applaud anyone who is a genius, but I'm not in your club. Yeah, I described mixing a color for the interiors of the trees, and now I'm mixing another color, and set of colors for the exterior parts of the trees. Working from back to front, by the way, all throughout. So the sky was first because it's the farthest thing away. Then the interiors of the trees are farther away than the surfaces of the trees. And the surfaces of the trees are farther away than the houses. So that's the reason for my sequence at this point. It's entirely different from the sequence of working from lightest to darkest. It's a shift, a big mental shift from then working from back to front. Getting some smaller brushes out for the foliage, because those are going to be essentially small dabs, isolated dabs. And we want to do them with a lot of control over the drawing. So far, drawing has consisted of big, broad areas, and it doesn't need to be accurately controlled like the subsequent areas of leafy foliage, because those are small, really carefully placed. And I'm going to have a variety of colors for the exterior parts of the trees, a variety of temperatures and values of what is essentially in the family of secondary green colors, greenish colors, a yellowish green, a bluish green. And so that's what will be coming next. And you can see that those colors, there's a sequence of those colors on the palette now, from really bright yellowish green to a darker, more neutral green, in that sequence. Mixing on the palette makes your life a lot easier as an artist. It's a little bit of delayed gratification, I suppose, because it's slower initially, but it's more effective in the long run. So at this point, I'm putting an initial layer, and then I'll probably, pat them around with a fan blender, and then go back over them with some lighter colors. So hold on to your seat. It's going to be a wild ride. Starting in with the shadow areas of the buildings, I'm sure I'm going to be retouching those trees as needed, but I want to get something established with the buildings. Incidentally, I'm using the maul stick to help draw straight, accurate lines of consistent width, because that's what's going on with architectural shapes. There is a technique to using the maul stick. I'm so used to doing it for so many years that I tend to forget to explain how I'm using it, but it accomplishes a couple things. It gives you a steady resting place above the picture so you're not mushing up the wet paint. The other thing is that, say for straight lines, I'll rest the metal ferrule of the brush onto the maul stick and control the pressure, very, very light physical pressure of the bristles against the surface of the paint. And my fingernail, which you can't really see, is resting against the maul stick, and the fingernail is just a part of your finger that will slide more easily along the maul stick. Really, it's a firm part of your finger which will help you control the exact distance and pressure that you're putting on the paintbrush onto the painting panel. So that's what that's about. And with practice, you get really quick at it. At first, it's going to be awkward, but with a lot of repetitive practice, it becomes natural. I lifted a little bit of that foliage off because it appears that it might be more effective to widen out the building. Or, well, at this point, the shadows are doing one thing. And I like that kind of angle that it's producing, but that chances are that throughout the hours that this painting is going to continue on, that shadow will disappear. So, as with everything in painting, time will tell. Now I'm mixing a color for it's the shingle roof area of the distant house there on the right. And that mixture is a pretty neutral earth color plus probably an earth brown umber and a burnt sienna. So raw umber, burnt sienna, and white. It gives you this very moderate, distant, warm, very slightly reddish color. Okay, here's what happened with the building. I thought I was going to paint the house dark, as you could see in the earlier layers with the dark wash, but as I got going, I realized that additional bright white areas were going to help. So the reason it appears to be a dappling technique is because I'm just pushing that painting on, that paint, that new wet opaque paint onto the surface of the selectively toned, but alas, the wrong selection of tone. So just going right over it. Had the option of wiping it off probably with a cloth, but you know, at this point, I found it more expedient just to press it on there. And it's that wash is still just a little wet, so smushing it onto the surface of the painting. That's what's going on there. The color for the building on both buildings, I've arbitrarily changed from the real world to make them a bright white color for compositional reasons. And I would never let facts stand in the way of a good story. So changing the color to make a picture that I like better. So in reality, the house that I'm making bright white, yellowish, well, the garage door is that color, but the rest of it's this kind of blue and earthy red. But I'm realizing early on that I want something dramatic there that's going to be the basis of the composition. And I've done something a little different with the house on the right. Well, adding some architectural elements that we don't even see, and changing the color of the roof. And the house is, I'm locating whatever light parts I can, because those light areas are what's really going to be the basis of this composition. In this video, I am going to attempt to paint sunlight and shadows in a constantly changing situation, as it always does, over several hours. I'm interested in light and shadow because they lend themselves to dramatic compositions. It's an idea that goes back to Claude Lorraine, it goes back to 17th century, 16th century Italian and northern landscape painting. It's been around a long time, still popular because it's still good. And I certainly haven't gotten tired of it. Essentially, it's the idea of using an isolated light amid various shadows. And it has a drama and a beauty. Quite honestly, the idea is very simple, but to execute it in a way that's beautiful is really quite challenging, no matter how formulaic it might seem. It's not as easy as it sounds to make it a really beautiful work out of that. So let's get started and see what happens.
Well, that is Daniel Sprick and the new video, Painting Light and Value. He's a great master. There's so much on this full-length video, and you can learn more about it at streamline.art. Remember, we have a discount code for you up in the comments section that you can take advantage of. Now let's get right to our interview with Daniel Sprick. Hi, I'm Eric Rhodes, publisher of Fine Art Connoisseur and Plein Air Magazine. I'm thrilled to have Daniel Sprick in the studio with us. Daniel, welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
You have been, in my perception, a very successful artist. And I don't know how to define success, because we all define success differently. But it appears that you're having good financial success, you've been embraced by the arts community, you've had documentaries done on you. You know, you would be kind of the new, dare I say, Andrew Wyeth.
Oh, well, that's wonderful. I really thank you for that. I do feel successful, and I'm really grateful about it too. And the way I define success more than anything is overall life satisfaction. I have enough money, not rich, but I have enough. And enough is enough to keep you happy, basically. There's nothing that I really want that I can't have. I'm
Right.
sure there's lots of things I can't have, but I don't want them anyway.
Right. Well, and I was thinking about this morning because I just saw a friend of mine, a long time ago friend of mine, who just bought another company for $23 billion. And, you know, a little bit of you starts thinking about, well, you know, that could have been me. And then it's like, but do I want to make the sacrifices that these people have to make? You know, oftentimes they're sacrificing their families. Their lives are difficult. I had personal experience watching someone who became ultra successful, was flying around on jets and, you know, and limousines, and I never saw someone more miserable in my life because it became a burden. And those were tools to help them get through it, you know, so they could sleep in their own bed at night. You know, they jet somewhere and jet home so they could be in their own bed with be with their families. So I agree with you. I think it's about what's going to give me personal joy, and enough is enough, whatever that means. How did this interest or passion for art begin for you?
Well, my story, which can't be that unique, is that when I was a little kid, my father did drawings of airplanes for me, and he wasn't even an artist. But you don't have to be a very good artist. His sense of proportion was, it seems to me, like was pretty good, as I recall. I wish I had some of those drawings. But it just completely took over my imagination, and I never stopped. Honestly, it made this massive impression on me that I can't, that's still there. I can still see it. And it was just a magical thing that you could take a blank piece of paper and a pencil and then form an image on it. It was, you know, I was like 4 or 5 years old, and it completely flipped my lid.
And you started drawing airplanes?
Airplanes, which has been a side interest of mine. I used to have airplanes for quite a few years, actually. Don't anymore.
You mean you were a pilot?
Yeah, I owned a number of different aircraft in my years. I flew here to Austin lots of times. But I don't want to give it the time. It requires a lot of time.
Yeah, it's dangerous if you don't do it a lot.
That's exactly right. You have to be really devoted to it, or don't do it at all. And now all I really want to put my energy into is the artwork. And I'm 67, and I'm well aware that the clock's ticking. And it's it's not going to last forever. And I feel like I'm really at the peak of my ability that I've ever been at. Oh, well, I hope it's not the peak. I hope I'm continuing to grow. Continuing to grow, yes.
But do you feel like there's an opus in you, something that you really have been desiring to do that you would hope would be, the one painting that would be the impossible task that you've accomplished?
Well, yes, I hope that. And
do you know what it is?
No, unfortunately, I don't. But as soon as I figure it out, I'm going to get to work. I think that I have this belief, no evidence, but I have this hope that my greatest work is yet to come. And so that is why I practice all the time. So I'll be prepared for it and capable of executing it when that big idea comes, if it does.
That's an important thing that you just said. It's something that I don't think a lot of people really understand, that as an artist, you have to stay in practice, because you lose something if you don't.
I think so.
I remember a story with Max Ginsberg, who we shot a video with, and I was much more naive at the time than I am now, but that's probably 10 years ago, maybe longer. But I remember Max, before we shot, he said he spent 5 days continuously painting so that he would be warmed up and in practice for the video. And I remember saying, Max, you've been painting for 65 years. Why do you even need to do that? He says, if I don't do it for 2 or 3 days, I start losing it. Do you find that to be true for you?
I don't know. I don't know exactly if it's that quick, but I just, you know what? I don't really think about it too much. I just like to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And I'm always curious, and I've always got some kind of new idea, even if it's not a big idea, maybe a small idea. But it's something that I always want to do and that I want to get better at. And by the way, I find that painting on location is one of the most challenging things there is for an artist, and especially to make it really good and make it interesting and beautiful and not just utterly repetitious, but to dig deep and make it, give a strong illusion of the thing that you're seeing and so forth. A side subject is, and correct me if you see it differently, but it seems to me that the ambitious young artists aren't even really interested in it is that much. A few are, I know, but
Interested in outdoor
painting
painting?
out on location, even if that's not going to be their ultimate expression, as a skill builder.
Well, I don't think that, first off, there's a huge plein air movement. There are people who are going out, many are hobbyists, many are professionals. But the one thing that I hear frequently is if they'd have known what it was going to provide for them, they would have done it sooner.
Okay.
Right? So, because we all know, you and I anyway know, that once you get outside, you see form and light differently. That certainly, you know, a lot of artists start out painting from photographs or something they'll pick off the internet, and you can look at the paintings and say that came from a photograph because your shadows are too dark, or your drawing is a little bit skewed, or the light is blown out in the sky a little bit too much, or, you know, some of the things that we learn when we go out and paint. But there are scads of studio artists who've never been outside, and certainly not being critical, but I try to encourage that, because once they do, I mean, it's frustrating in the early stages, as you know, but once they do, they see things differently. So that had to have a huge impact on your work.
I think it did. It has, and it continues to, because I don't intend to ever stop painting out on location. Partly because it's a joy just of its own. Mm-hmm. There's a couple reasons why I like it. I know we're flipping around to different subjects, but
that's fine.
Part of why I like it is because when I'm out there, it's urgent. I can't go to the refrigerator, and it's better if I don't be checking my phone and all this stuff, because it's, you know, things are changing quickly and there's only so much time and you have to get with it. And that's part of why I like it. It completely takes over my existence when I'm out there, more than studio painting does. Studio painting.
You can't think about anything else when you're
right.
painting on location.
That's right. And that's part of why I like it. It's a consuming experience to me, because I'm putting myself into it entirely, and I want this moment to be the defining moment of my life. I want it to make it the best thing I can possibly do. So it's going to take full concentration.
Well, and they make great memories too. I don't like to get rid of my studies.
Well, I feel exactly the same way. They make great memories because, in fact, and John Ruskin said things like this in the 19th century, why artists should draw. It's because you'll embed it, you know, you'll internalize that memory, and you'll remember things outside your visual realm. You'll remember the aromas, the sounds, the wind, the temperature, you know, maybe you're getting bug bites or sunburned or you're cold or smelled terrible, maybe. if you're somewhere. It could be, but all of which enriches the experience actually in it. For that reason, I don't like to sell those because they help me remember my life.
Exactly.
More than any other thing that I do.
It's not the same as a photo album.
Not remotely. The photo, which I think cameras are amazing. I don't, remarkable, technological progress, but it's a 1/60th of a second, and you don't remember it at all. But when you spend hours and hours on it, you remember the clouds moving, you remember the, wind changing direction, and it got cold and then it got hot, and you remember all sorts of things about it. And peripheral things, you remember sirens going past in the background, which were irritating and made it hard to concentrate, but you still, it was part of being alive.
Yeah.
And you remember, what I find, I'll even remember, emotions that I was feeling at that time, which had nothing to do with the painting. But that is why I like how it helps me remember my life. And that's why to me, the memory of that is worth more than the money I would make by selling it.
Yeah, have you ever thought about just taking your plein air studies and doing a book and writing down what you remember from those studies?
Well, I never thought of that.
Because and I've been thinking about this because my studio is lined with a lot of my studies. Some of them aren't very good, but it's the same thing. I can remember standing there doing a nocturne outside this bar and hearing the piano and the laughter on the inside and feeling like I wanted to be more inside with them than I was outside painting, that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't it be fun to take those, just dictate them and then do a book? Your outdoor studies, your plein air work is really world class.
Thanks. And
when did you start doing that? Have you always done that?
Yeah, but I got more serious about it in the last 20 years, I think. And more consistent about it, maybe even in the last 5 years.
You get out a lot.
Intermittently. Like in 2015, I spent the entire summer outside. I just couldn't make myself go in.
Nice.
And here I had a brand new studio and didn't even use it for the first number of months that it was there. And then I'll go, most of the winter without painting outdoors. And then when the weather gets warm again, I'm just antsy and anxious, and I want to go outside, and I have a backpack, and all the painting gear will fit in a backpack, and I go out around town on a bicycle. And so it comes and goes in, with various moods. If I have a real drive for a particular piece in the studio, then I'll just stay on that and not do anything else till I get that relatively accomplished. But usually, so it's in between pieces. Do
you find, though, with some pieces you just have to get away from them because you can't see them anymore because you're too close to them?
And, unfortunately, that is true. But or I will think that I'm done with it, so put it away, sometimes for months, not look at it for months, get it out again and see all sorts of problems I just didn't see before. So I thought I was done, but it's not done. Yeah. It's got a lot, it needs a lot.
Is a painting ever really done?
I would say probably not.
Yeah.
It's never done. As Bert Silverman said, though, it was one of my favorite quotes. He says, "The painting's not done, but I am." Because you just run out of gas for it. Yeah. You run out of...
Yeah, there comes a moment where it's like, get this out of my studio. I'm done. What perplexes you if you were to think about particular paintings or artists from the past? Is there anybody who accomplished something that you wish you could figure out that you haven't figured out yet?
Well, I think the Flemish painters, they did some things that I can't do, but I'm really not going to try to do.
Is this like painting mosquitoes on flowers, or?
Well, I could probably find a technical way to accomplish it. There's a sensibility to Renaissance and Northern Renaissance painting that I think is the most sublime of anything that's been done in human history. But it's not really for me to do. I feel like my sensibilities are more matched to the 19th century naturalist movement. And of course, our mutual friend Peter Trippi, he's quite an expert in that period of painting. We talked about it quite a lot at the Face 2018 or 2016?
Probably 2018.
2018 in Miami. And there was a lot of really interesting discussion of 19th century naturalism. And it's really the area of painting that I relate to most. And the piece that you mentioned earlier that in my studio, the large painting it's really, you know, along the lines of 19th century naturalism. Somehow the paint, it's a little bit of a dissonance for me in the sense that when I go to museums, the artwork that I love the most is usually work by, you know, the painter Jan van Eyck or Northern Italian painter Giovanni Bellini, or Montaigne, Roger van der Weyden of back to you know, Flanders. But there's no sense in me trying to paint like that. It's just more of a fit for me to paint a 19th century naturalist style. And actually, now it just occurs to me one logical reason why is that it was what was very good painting at the time. You know, say like the painter, and I can't pronounce French, so I'll just anglicize it. It's Dagnon Bouveray, and painters of that ilk, the 19th century French naturalists. I think painting reached a height with them and then was just abandoned when Cubism came along and blew everything up.
Yeah, Impressionism and everything else. It was that everybody got seduced by all those other things. So do you think that you were born in the wrong time?
No, because I don't want to burden myself with things like that. No, I was born at the right time. Everyone else was born at the wrong time. I think, yeah, that's funny. I never really have given much thought to that question, but I think, okay, a way I would sneak around to answer a question like that is that the 19th century naturalist painters that I think were so great, I think they were just had unfortunate timing in world history.
But isn't that kind of what makes them who they are? I mean, the environment has a huge impact on what they're painting.
Well, I mean the social climate and cultural climate changed. They had reached their height, but I don't think they were
ignored.
recognized. They were ignored, is what I mean. They were ignored, and that's their unfortunate historical timing. And in a way, I think I'm picking up where they left off.
Well, and hopefully this new generation of painters that's coming up will pick up the baton and take what you're doing and others are doing and take it to a new level by the time they've put in their 50 years. And, you know, I just, you think about somebody who got that level of training at such a young age and what they can become because of it, especially if they stay curious and they keep pursuing, you know, always trying to get better and never stabilizing in a particular place. What frustrates me is seeing, and I'm not critical of it, it frustrates me to see someone who gets to a level, makes a decent living at that level, and never pushes themselves again. And I can cite lots of painters we both know who have done that, and they still do fabulous work, but what they could have done by pushing through and pushing further, but it's painful.
Well, you know, that's one of the hazards of success, is that, you know, the world gives you this message that you're wonderful, so you don't have to keep trying that hard anymore, because everything you do sells, and you're, well, I think an artist really needs to be conscious of that and never take it too seriously. Never believe you're so great.
You also get to this this place where you're trying to protect what you've accomplished, right? In other words, you might not be willing to take a risk because what if I screw up and now all of a sudden, I can't make that car payment or pay for that house? The financial kind of starts talking to you. And that's a danger zone. So people who transcend that, people who push beyond it, to me, I think it's pretty remarkable because it's real easy to get to stabilize and get into a place of a comfort zone.
And what we were talking about is, you start to be successful, and then you immediately, like any good American, start living right at or beyond your means. And so you put yourself under this financial pressure.
Right.
And you have to keep making that money. And you may be grinding out the same formula over and over. And, if it's successful, then you don't have to improve. And that's an unfortunate trap for not just artists. I would imagine it applies to a lot of different kinds of professions.
Everything.
I imagine. But so it takes a certain intellectual humility. One of the things, back to our earlier conversation, is that, I describe my life as saying that basically I already have everything that I want, and there's nothing else I really want. So there's no big pressure on me. So I can afford to put all the time in the world into one painting, no matter how long it takes, because fortunately, I'm older now, and I don't have to, I don't have the material desires that I used to have. In fact, I find myself wanting a little less. And every time my daughter comes over, she says, "Dad, you used to have more stuff than this." And I think, my point was that you can put pressure on yourself which requires you to keep making more money, or you can turn all that around and get out of these obligations and reduce the pressure on yourself, so that the only thing that really matters is doing your absolute, honest, very best work. And I certainly know a few artists like that are deaf to praise, and they just want to just listen to their insides and make this painting, this one thing, the only thing that counts in their life, no matter how long it takes to do.
In this world, this environment that we're living in with continual performance, we're performing on Facebook, on Instagram, of what we're doing or what we've got. We have a whole generation who travel around the world to get that selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower, and to show their friends what they're doing. And it's having an impact on art as well. It may be a positive impact, it may be a negative impact, but it's changing it because a lot of artists are becoming performance artists. It's hey, look at me, look at what I can do, look at what I just accomplished. And I understand it, because if I do something I'm proud of, I want to share it with the world. But I also think that, if you've got in the back of your head, boy, this is going to sell, or this is going to be in a museum, or I'm going to make a lot of money on this, or look at how my friends are going to be impressed on that, I'm not so sure that you break through to the level that you could otherwise when you just shed all of that and say, I don't care, I just gotta satisfy what's in my heart.
In the long term, I think that's the most satisfying. I've gone through what you're talking about, and I've eliminated those pressures from my life systematically, bit by bit. The high maintenance house, the airplanes, all these things that actually put pressure on me.
Do you want to be remembered in a particular way? Is there something in the back of your mind that you feel would kind of put the rubber stamp on it all that says I've accomplished, you know, really what I wanted to do in my life because I'm being remembered as a particular, in a particular way.
Well, I think that's natural. Probably all of us would like to some extent. You know what? That's our hedge against mortality, basically. Vermeer and Caravaggio, in both of those cases, they were drifted into obscurity for centuries after their deaths. They were just forgotten, swept away. Vermeer was really discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, 300 years after his death, or longer than 300 years, about 330 years after. And Caravaggio, both of those artists started to be discovered and appreciated slowly throughout the 20th century.
And usually because of one particular catalyst, one person who discovered them or brought them to light. I mean, the same thing happened with Van Gogh, really. It was his sister-in-law when she was in her late 70s who really started to sell his work and to bring it to light.
You mean long after Theo had died too?
Yes, yes.
That story I didn't really know, but there was quite a delay. He wasn't instantly known. Most artists are soon forgotten after their death.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep that in mind. And it'll happen with most of us.
Well, I suppose that's a good reason to try to get those things on museum walls and hope that the museums...
I'd surely like that, instead of my poor daughter having to inherit this rooms full of artwork that she doesn't know where to really put. I would like that. It's still no guarantee, because artists who were popular at the time of their death and they were in, you know, well-known, and, you know, 50 years later, they can be forgotten.
That's right.
So
well, there's a whole dialogue about that and how to prevent that from happening, which we'll have over dinner or something.
Of course, I would like that. I would like that, but I just can't put too much importance on it, because I'd make myself miserable if I do.
That's right.
I would like to get more things in museums before I, you know, graduate to a higher plane.
It's kind of nice to think about, you know, having been able to check that box and know that, you know, there's a possibility that your work will live on. There's no guarantee. One of the best ways to do that is, quite frankly, collectors, because you get great collectors. There's some in your town in Denver who, you know, they amass these giant collections, and then they end up building museums, and those museums hopefully live on, you know, from a personal collection. So there's a lot of opportunity. Well, I think that this has been really terrific, getting to know you and learning more about you, and I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thanks, Eric. You're a fantastic conversationalist.
It's fun to do it.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, our guest today has been Daniel Sprick, and it's been fun having a conversation with him. Thank you for watching. Well, that's a brand new video, Painting Light and Value with Daniel Sprick, and you can learn more about it at streamline.art. And remember, there is a discount code for today only to purchase that video in the comments section. Thank you for watching. I'm Eric Rhodes.
In this video, I am going to attempt to paint sunlight and shadows in a constantly changing situation, as it always does, over several hours. I'm interested in light and shadow because they lend themselves to dramatic compositions. It's an idea that goes back to Claude Lorraine. It goes back to 17th century, 16th century Italian and northern landscape painting. It's been around a long time, still popular because it's still good. And I certainly haven't gotten tired of it. Essentially, it's the idea of using an isolated light amid various shadows. And it has a drama and a beauty. Quite honestly, the idea is very simple, but to execute it in a way that's beautiful is really quite challenging. No matter how formulaic it might seem, it's not as easy as it sounds to make it a really beautiful work out of that. So let's get started and see what happens.